Thank you. Thank you very much. Innovation, right? Innovation. What is innovation? When I think of innovation, I think of a moment. I think of a time like this, a moment in time where people gather around, we all sit together, and we witness something. We witness a change in the way we think of our world, of our distances, of our spaces, of our place, right? Here, everybody's gathered around Alexander Graham Bell to listen to the first phone call between New York and Chicago. A conversation that would have taken weeks now happened in seconds. Imagine that moment. I think to myself about what Alexander Graham Bell must have been thinking as he was making that call. Maybe it was, what am I going to say? It's like, uh-oh. I spent all this time building this thing, and now what am I going to say? I think about his curiosity that led to that moment. Talk about one of the most inspiring innovators of our time, right? And when I think about that curiosity, that deep, self-driven curiosity, I realize that it transcends across all areas of our lives. And it didn't surprise me when the first time I walked into the National Geographic Society and into the old Hubbard's Hall to find out that he had an office there, and to find out that he was actually one of these people, one of these 33 people that gathered around the National Geographic Society actually the Cosmos Club in a cold winter day in 1888, to write the charter and found the National Geographic Society. In fact, he was one of the second presidents of the society itself. And so, it was this thing where it was like, okay, well, I'm an engineer, and exploration has always been rooted in engineering. And this concept, to look back into our past, to look at where we came from, to understand our place in this world, to understand what we're doing here, and the very boundaries of our existence, that's just our curiosity. Our curiosity is our human tradition. That's what gets us from one place to the next. That's what gets us as a group to think about, what we're doing here. And we innovate to fulfill that tradition. My story is a little funny. Now I'm a research scientist here at UC San Diego. I'm an explorer of the National Geographic Society. My life is defined by curiosity, and it has since the very beginning. Who do you think of this picture as me? Yeah, it's that kid right there. Yeah. Curious, right? Or just rebellious, one and the same, trying to push the limits. And I'm surrounded by my brothers and sisters and cousins and my grandparents. While later on in life, I became an engineer and a scientist. At this point, I was just a human being curious about the world, and my grandfather was telling me about our past, where we came from, about keeping tied to our roots. Later on in life, I found myself with this deep drive to get out there and understand more about where I came from, about my past. I grew up in the United States, but I knew I had ancestry that linked me to something, from hundreds of years before, right? So I went out into the world. I went out and tried to find this land of the north that my grandfather had spoke about, this land of Mongolia. And that's me, right around the time that I was finishing up grad school, living with nomads in the northern steppe. How did I get there? I had this crazy ambition. I decided I was going to buy a plane ticket, with not much money at all whatsoever, a little backpack, my first handheld GPS, and ride out to the countryside on a horse that I had bought at the Capitol. That was my plan, right? And when I had to get home, I'd press home on the GPS, and that was my idea. And I met these Mongolian friends, these people that became like family to me, on a train to get to that capital city, and they quickly told me, Albert, you will die. There's no way, right? But they agreed to give me, a road in, and they let me live with their family, and I got to learn about this past, and I got to learn about this ancestry, and I learned about something that was profoundly different than I had understood it. I learned about a person, Genghis Khan, an iconic figure, right? A person who redefined our entire landscape from a political, socioeconomical, everything, right? Creating one of the largest contiguous empires in human history in a single lifetime. And from the West, where I grew up in the United States as a kid, the majority of my understanding of this history was from Bill and Ted's Bogus Adventures. Like running around with a bat in his hand. And it wasn't this. There was this huge conflict of understanding. It was, what am I thinking about here when I look back at history and I don't realize that there's actually, a defined truth? What I learned was that this single person showed up with literally nothing, and in a single lifetime connected all of these enemy tribes that had been warring for thousands of years together to create an empire that spanned, the entire continent of Eurasia. I mean, just insane. And in a single lifetime, I mean, more than Alexander the Great, more than the Romans did in their entire empire. And how did that happen? And why is there such a conflict of this legacy, right? Why is it shrouded in mystery? Well, there's not a single historical text that was written by his people during the time that he was alive. There was not a painting of him while he was alive from his own people. There's literally not a single tomb of he or his sons or his grandsons or any of the members of the Mongolian imperial family that have ever been discovered. I mean, there's not a single shroud of evidence, a shred, anything whatsoever. And part of this is that, when he was finally laid to rest, legend has it that they were sent north to the imperial grounds, to the homelands, to the sacred valley, the valley of the Yigikurik, or the Forbidden Precinct. And that the tradition is that if you disturb the burial grounds of the great Khans, then you're disturbing the very essence of their soul, and that's unacceptable. So nobody's gone back to look. But I'm curious, right? It's my human tradition. I'm here now, Cal IT2, the new Qualcomm Institute at UCSD, and it's an amazing thing to be able to think about ways in which we can look while respecting those traditions. Ways in which we can use technology, we can use things like satellite imagery to redefine how we think about the globe, how we look at literally every single pixel of this planet can be looked at from space now. And that presents huge problems, right? We thought of ways in this building about how to deal with that data analytics on a large scale. We found ways in which we can get people, we can crowdsource the support of analytical contributions. And we launched this thing right out of my office, and we put it on the front page of National Geographic, and the next thing you know, we started collecting data from all sorts of people telling us where to look, looking at all that little bits of satellite imagery. In the end, we collected over 2.3 million human contributions from the crowd just telling us where they saw something strange. And it starts to look like noise at first, but then you start to see all the little data points here, all individual contributions pointing to little places that have clusters of agreement. And we wanted to find out what was there, right? This is how we innovate, how we deal with, how we look at the world together. All of this here, when we look at the time that it was contributed to this site, it's 18 years of collective human input, volunteered to us. I could get some students to do that, but I don't know if anybody's going to want to spend 18 years looking at satellite imagery on their own. So we found ways in which we could think past that. We started building tools with which we could go out and survey in a new way, maybe aerial tools. Here's an example of the first time that I flew my first prototype of a camera on a multi-bladed rotocopter, and it looks successful at first, but then you realize the moment in which I understand for the first time that 8 spinning blades are about to land on me, and I don't know what I'm going to do to catch them. You can see right there, yeah, that's the moment. We find ways in which something like this can be taken into the field. And I've had the absolute honor and pleasure of being able to take these concepts and think about how we can apply them to exploration in a way that defies our understanding of what exploration is. Over time, with this concept, with this idea that I would take satellite imagery, I would take UAVs, I would take the most advanced tools in geophysics, where we could look into the ground with things like ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, electromagnetic induction, electroresistivity tomography, and we'd combine all these different sensors together. We'd create 3D digs that didn't actually touch the ground or turn over a single rock, but could look into the subsurface without destroying that tradition of non-invasiveness, that the Mongolian tradition that you shouldn't disturb this tomb, but we could find some essence of the truth. We could try to bridge that gap of knowledge between legend and reality, and we thought maybe we could do this through, this type of exploration. We started going into the field in the ways that reminded me of, it smelled of the past. It was like these huge trucks rolling through the unknown. And we got permission with the Mongolian government because of this approach, because we're collaborating at such a high level with the top scientists and top historians of the Mongolian community, that they would take us into this sacred land and allow us to work together to try to redefine the past. We'd go and look at the very peaks of every single mountain. And there was one moment in particular when the technology didn't matter and nothing else mattered, but it was just simply the fact that a tree had fallen down, and in the roots of those trees, we made a discovery. On one very specific mountain, a very sacred mountain, one which has resonated with the Mongolian tradition for 800 years. Or more. We found in the roots of a tree the remains of a massive temple. I'm holding in my hand a tile. What is that tile? I'm looking into the soul of the person who made this tile. What is that tile? It's a piece of a roof. Somebody actually made that. We know now they made it 800 years ago, or approximately around that time. When we're walking across the ground, our feet are crunching, and we're wondering what's underneath us, and we literally find that we're walking on top of a roof. What is this? What is this thing here? But we can't dig, right? So as far as we go in terms of archaeology, here's Dr. Frederick Hebert, National Geographic Archaeology Fellow, covering over his divot, right? Because more than anything, we have to respect those traditions, right, of non-invasiveness. So then we start to find other ways, right? We start to put our tools together. We start to look at ways in which we can use ground-penetrating radar, for example, here, attached on a sled with UCSD undergraduate student Radley Angelo being our mule. Sorry, Radley. And us driving forward and sending signals into the ground and measuring the reflection of what's coming back at us so we can model this. We combine that with magnetometry, like I said, with all those other tools that I mentioned, electromagnetism and resistivity and everything else. When we combine these things together, we start to create a map, right? We start to look into the ground with new eyes. And we put those things into a 3D world, into the star cave over at Kalaiji 2. And we start to try to redefine what's there, right? Create a dig without digging. When we look at the data that we have now, it's amazing to think about how far we've come, where virtual reality and reality meet, right? Now we're able to immerse ourselves in information that before, it would take the destruction of a tradition to find. And I think in some ways what we're trying to do is bridge with the knowledge that we have now and the understanding of the past, this concept that there was a person who transformed our entire planet. And we can start to reconcile some of the conflict between that legend, right? Between the idea of Bill and Ted's bogus adventures and this iconic person who transformed our planet. Now, this has been a story of one of the greatest adventures of my life, right? Where I've actually been able to follow in the footsteps of the explorers of the past, right? To think about the guy, Alexander Graham Bell, when he was in his office thinking about curiosity and what that meant, right? Maybe this is what he meant, combining innovation with that tradition of curiosity. But before I leave you, I wanted to just share this one last kind of guttural experience that I had. On the last day of or the last few days of the last expedition that I led, at the site of the camp, randomly, totally by coincidence, these 7 shamans came up the valley. It takes days to get there. I mean, it's in one of the most remote areas in the world. And these 7 shamans came there to pay tribute to this very specific mountain, to come there and worship the god Tengri, the god of the sky. and to understand, their place in this very specific mountain and to the spirit of Genghis Khan. It was a terrifying moment, In fact, at one point, my main collaborator in Mongolia, Professor Ishtor, turned to me and said, "Albert, the head shaman, he wants to see the leader of our group." And I'm thinking, uh-oh. I start to clean my nails, I start to fold my hair back and try to, put some deodorant on. Because, in Mongolia, what I've come to know is that if you're gonna see somebody's soul, or if you're gonna, understand who they are, you're gonna smell them. That's the way that you would do that, right? I mean, you don't kiss somebody, you smell them. That's the tradition, right? Because your soul is in your smell. And I'd been in the field for almost a month now, and that smell is gonna be pretty bad, right? He explains to me that I have to say these words, these ancient Mongolian words, Sambano, and that I would sit there at sundown with the shaman, and he would judge why we were there, and he would tell us, what the spirits of the mountain say. I'm sitting here as a scientist in a ger, in this yurt, surrounded by computers, satellite modems, ground-penetrating radars, drones, with a collaborative effort of 18 years of human effort piping into us from this crowdsourcing website. And I've got this shaman who's just wanting to know what my soul says and why I'm here. Terrifying moment. This is right before I'm about to go and speak to these people. This is Professor Ishtor explaining to me what I'm going to do. And in the back, just barely, you can see the shaman preparing for sundown.
I can't say I'm not nervous.
Imagine a moment in your life where you're going to experience something so genuine, where it's not constructed, it's not random, it's not a moment of a constructed window into the past. It's happening right now. And I'm about to go and sit at this mountain with these shamans who came there to fulfill an ancient tradition of theirs, to pay tribute to this mountain. The moments that follow, my understanding of what I was doing there evolved. They wouldn't let me photograph or videotape what happened there, but I could write in my journal that night. And as the sounds went on throughout the night, I recorded the sounds of the drums, of the trance that occurred, and I'll play for you now the sounds of those drums with the drawings that I wrote in my terrible artistic skills in my notebook. And hopefully you'll get to experience what I experienced just a little bit, because it was so profound. A convergence of an idea of technology and innovation and exploration with this deep human tradition. The shaman sat there covered in this veil, this black veil, with this headdress and these eyes sitting right here, and he stood over me with this drum, beating this drum rhythmically on top of me as I knelt down, low, with my head ducked down as if terrified, frozen, petrified at the moment. You can hear his voice in the back. They brought me into their ger later that night and told me about the past, told me about my traditions, told me that the one thing I was missing was my roots to my ancestry, and that I needed to go back and needed to understand that history of mine, and that's why I was sent to that mountain. As he danced around me with this veil over his head, shimmering around in the moonlight, the dew just sitting on my face in the grass of where my hands are. You can smell, the earth rising from the ground, and this person standing over me, covered in little jingling bells and ropes that are falling around. And as his drum comes to a climax, he enters into a deep trance. And he falls to the ground. And that moment, he starts talking to me. It's translated through him from ancient Mongolian into Mongolian and then English to me. And he tells me that it didn't matter what we were doing. It didn't matter that we had these drones and that we had this crowdsourcing thing and that, that we had these ground-penetrating radars. What mattered was my soul and why I was there. And in the end, he said it was okay, and it was good that I was there, and that I'd been sent there by Tengri to tell the world, to bring back the story of this past, of this mountain, of this place, of this rooted human tradition, of this community, of this point, that we as a human society, our traditions, aren't just about curiosity and about progress and about things like this. It's about a sense of society. It's about a sense of responsibility. And so today when I stand here, to kick off this incredible event, we're thinking about innovation and we're thinking about tradition. And to me, it's about respecting our societies, respecting our sense of community, and it's about the tradition of our human nature towards one another that define how we innovate for the future. Thank you very much.